You know that mysterious ache that just seems to pop up out of nowhere? Or maybe a problem that you've been trying to fix forever, but nothing seems to work? Well, what if I told you the problem isn't actually where you think it is? It turns out our bodies aren't just a collection of separate parts. No, they're this incredibly interconnected system. And really getting that is the first step to understanding our health. So let's dive into how this all works. This idea is captured perfectly right here. It's not about one broken part, it's about a cascade, like a biological domino effect. One tiny little push can set off this huge system-wide tumble. Okay, but this idea of a cascade, what does that actually look like in our bodies? To really get a handle on it, we're going to look at two super fascinating case studies. One starts with a tiny, tiny error at the genetic level, and the other, it begins with just a single weak muscle. First up, we've got the genetic cascade. We're going to focus on cystic fibrosis, or CF. And this is a perfect example of how one little glitch in our DNA blueprint can cause huge, surprising problems in places you'd never, ever think are connected. So, what is CF really? Well, at its absolute core, it's caused by a mutation in the gene for just one single protein. It's called the CFTR protein, and its job is to be like a little gatekeeper on our cells, controlling how chloride ions move in and out. When that one gatekeeper is broken, well, that's when the problems start. So here it is, the chain reaction, the dominoes falling one by one. First, you've got that faulty gene. That means the CFTR channel, our little gatekeeper, it's busted. Because of that, chloride ions get stuck inside the cell. Now, a basic rule in biology is that water follows salt, or in this case, ions. So since the ions are trapped inside, the water stays inside too. And the final domino to fall? The mucus that lines our organs, especially our lungs, becomes incredibly thick and sticky. And you can really see the main consequence of this chain reaction right in the lungs. Look on the left. In healthy lungs, mucus is thin and watery. It gets swept away easily by these tiny little hairs called cilia, taking any nasty stuff with it. But on the right, in lungs with CF, that mucus is basically glue. It just clogs up the airways, the cilia can't move, and it turns into a perfect breeding ground for bacteria. And that's exactly why frequent lung infections are such a huge part with the disease. So, if the lungs are the main battleground, you'd think doctors would look there for a diagnosis, right? It just makes sense. But here's what's so fascinating. One of the most reliable tests for CF has absolutely nothing to do with breathing. It's all about sweat. So why on earth would that be? It's because that exact same faulty gatekeeper, that CFTR channel, it's also in our sweat glands. Normally, its job is to pull the chloride back out of our sweat and into the body. But in someone with CF, that broken channel just leaves the chloride on the skin. This makes their sweat incredibly salty. So salty, in fact, that it's a key way to diagnose the condition. Just think about that. A single genetic glitch causes thick mucus in the lungs and salty sweat on the skin. That right there is a system-wide cascade. Okay, so let's check out our second example, a mechanical chain reaction. Now this one might feel a little closer to home for a lot of us. We're going to trace a really common complaint, chronic hip pain, all the way back to its surprisingly distant source. I mean, think about it. You've got that nagging pain in your hip. You stretch it, you ice it, you rest it, but it just never quite goes away. The natural assumption, of course, is that the problem is the hip. But what if your hip is just the last one in line, the final screaming victim of a whole bunch of biomechanical mistakes that started somewhere else entirely? And often, this is where that whole cascade gets kicked off. It can start with something as simple as a single weak muscle in your lower leg, the tibialis anterior. Its big job is to help hold up your foot's arch. So when it gets weak, the arch can start to collapse, and that causes your ankle to roll inward. This is called ankle pronation, and that's our first domino right there. Now, that inward roll, it doesn't just stop at the ankle, oh no. It sets off a chain reaction all the way up your leg. It forces your shin bone, the tibia, to rotate inward, and that rotation completely messes up the alignment of your knee joint, causing it to angle inward, a condition you might know as knock knee. The problem has now officially traveled up the chain. And this is the final painful result. Because the knee is now at the wrong angle, your thigh bone, the femur, doesn't sit quite right in your hip socket anymore. This creates all this weird friction and irritation. Over time, that can lead to inflammation, cartilage damage, even extra bone growth. And it all adds up to pain in your hip. But remember, the root cause, the very first domino, was just a weak muscle way down in your foot. Crazy, right?
So, we've seen these two totally different examples, one genetic, one mechanical, but they both teach us the exact same lesson. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that if we want to be truly healthy, we can't just treat symptoms where they show up. We have to think like detectives and hunt for that very first domino. And this way of thinking isn't just for rare diseases or weird injuries. It applies to some of the most common health problems we face. Take hypertension, high blood pressure. It affects a staggering 47% of American adults. That's almost half. And it's almost never a single cause problem. Instead, it's usually its own cascade. A bunch of factors lead to some damage in the blood vessels, which then triggers inflammation and plaque, which then makes the pressure even higher. It's just another domino effect playing out inside millions of us. So what are we supposed to do with all this information? Well, it really boils down to 4 key things. First, we just have to remember that the body is a system. A problem over here can have really surprising effects way over there. Second, that means we have to look for the root cause, not just put a band-aid on the last domino to fall. Third, this shows us just how powerful prevention is, right? A small positive action like strengthening one little muscle in your foot can stop a whole world of pain later. And finally, just knowing this stuff, appreciating how interconnected our bodies are, that's the first step to taking good care of it. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Now that you know how one single small issue can set off this massive chain reaction, what's the most important first domino you can protect in your own health? Whether that's your sleep, your nutrition, your stress levels, recognizing its power is the first step to making sure those other dominoes never have a reason to fall. Thanks for joining me.